previously on the chosen people.
Also tell them this. Now, if you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples, all throughout the whole earth. You'll be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation.
Are all our elders in place to monitor the boundaries when we are called out?
Yes, we are as prepared as possible.
My God, you are the God of our fathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The one who has brought us from our misery in Egypt. Your servant and your people stand before you.
Moses, my servant, come to me on the mountain.
And so, Moses took one step, another, and another, across the boundary line, into the darkness that was gathered on the mountain and stretching into the sky above. He began his climb.
The battlefield is set. The stakes are high. The only thing standing between you and victory? Nothing. Ascend to the pinnacle of gaming greatness with Lenovo Legion. Laptops, towers, and the new award-winning Legion Go, the world's first officially licensed handheld, powered by Steam OS. Legion relentlessly pushes gaming technology forward, with towers built for raw, untamed power, laptops with best-in-class AI tuning that sharpen your reflexes, and the Legion Go, a handheld for serious gaming on the go. Stay ahead with lightning-fast responsiveness on a stunning 16-inch PureSight display. Keep your cool with cold front thermal technology, engineered for marathon sessions. And with all-day battery life, the game never stops until you say so. So check out Lenovo.com/Legion. Lenovo. Empowering creators everywhere.
As the mountain quakes and the shofar sounds, the chosen people stand on the brink of a covenant that will bind heaven and earth. Shalom, my friends, from here in the Holy Land of Israel. I'm Yael Eckstein with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Welcome to the chosen people. We find ourselves standing at the edge of a monumental moment. The children of Israel have been delivered from the shackles of Egypt, a land soaked in the sorrow of slavery. They have journeyed through the wilderness, led by the mighty hand of God, witnessing wonders that defy human understanding. And now they stand at the foot of Mount Sinai, trembling with anticipation. The air is thick with expectation. A holy hush has fallen over the chosen people as they prepare to receive something unparalleled, a revelation that will define their identity and shape their destiny.
Aaron stood before the foot of the mountain with the nation of Israel in the dense smoke. Several hours had passed since his brother had ascended through the terrifying darkness, but no one dared move or turn away. Aaron would never have admitted the genuine fear he felt. The longer Moses' absence stretched before him, he wondered what he ought to be doing. His lower back and the soles of his feet were starting to hurt. He eyed the boundary line before him and tentatively stole a look at the elders. They clearly shared his restlessness. There was still palpable fear in the air, and all the pent-up anxiety sent a nervous energy that could be felt reverberating through the crowd. Aaron could sense that Miriam felt it too. They needed to act, to get ahead of it. An unruly crowd must be appeased.
Do you think we should continue to wait? Or should we send the people back to camp and wait for Moses there?
I'm not sure. Nothing quite like this has ever happened before. The Lord didn't specify how long to wait, or what to do after we stood before him.
The people are growing restless.
It falls to us to lead them in Moses' absence.
I understand that, Miriam, but what would you have?
Look.
Aaron whipped his attention back upwards. Sure enough, there was movement in the smoky darkness on the slope of the mountain. The shape of a man was emerging, and the entire nation of Israel fixed its eyes. Moses materialized before them. He was unharmed, but his clothes and hair were covered in soot and grime. Aaron wrinkled his nose. He could only imagine the smoky aroma that would linger on his person and in his tent for days to come. Moses walked with purpose down the incline and made a beeline toward Aaron and Miriam, his expression serious.
Aaron, Miriam, has anyone crossed the boundary lines?
No, of course not. We've been waiting here for you to return.
Why do you ask?
Our God spoke to me again in the holiness of his presence. He warned me again that no one is to break through to see him, or they will die. He also warned me that even priests must consecrate themselves, or he will break out in anger against them. No one is to approach the mountain. He sent me back down to prepare the people to hear from him.
He will speak to all of us?
Moses nodded. He then addressed the people in a booming voice.
Israel, stay where you are. Our God has sent me to warn you. Listen to the elders among you and do not cross the boundaries we have laid for you. Our God is so holy and mighty that we must keep our distance. Do not approach the mountain if you value your life. His anger will burn against you if you cross the threshold we've laid. Do you understand?
Aaron watched as the crowd murmured assent, and looks of concern passed through them. They were still on edge from the earlier display of power, but they did not seem keen to disobey the guidelines their elders had put in place for them. Many were still shuddering out of fear or pale at the prospect of being turned to ash.
Now, our God will speak to us.
The Israelites stood in anticipation. Everyone held their breath as one. For a moment, all was silent. Everything went quiet except the low whistle of the wind above. They waited for their God to speak to them from the misty mountain above their heads. Then, just as he had spoken over the silent void in the beginning, God spoke.
I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery.
Aaron's mouth fell open, and he stumbled forward a step. The sound left him speechless, and his mind struggled to comprehend. He was not alone. The Israelites were terrified. The latent anxiety quickly churned into a frenetic energy that pulsed through the columns of trembling people.
Do not have any other gods before me.
Lightning split the sky, lighting the darkened world around them, and thunder shook the ground again. Aaron spied more than one burly man buckled at the knees. He turned and saw a warrior wetting his tunic in fear. Aaron had never seen any god, Egyptian or otherwise, do the things his God could do. But he had often wondered where these foreign gods fell in this divine hierarchy, or even if they truly existed, if they ever had at all. It was now unmistakable that the God they followed into the wilderness reigned above them all.
Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, the earth below, or the waters under the earth.
More lightning, thunder, and terror. But Aaron wondered at the outlawing of idols. Creating an idol was a common practice, the most natural thing in the world. In his experience, people could not understand the spiritual alone. They craved something physical, tangible, something they could touch and comprehend. It was comforting for their faith and essential for their belief.
Do not bow in worship to them, and do not serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misrepresents his name.
Aaron could understand that one. Names were a powerful thing.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, either you, your son or daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien within your gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blesses the Sabbath day and declares it holy.
Now this was truly unique. In all their toiling in Egypt, they had never known a day free from work, a day that would be kept holy, a day dedicated entirely to worship. Aaron had never heard of such a thing, and certainly not for an entire nation. Men, women, and children, and for everyone, not just priests or elders or leaders.
Honor your father and mother, so that you may have a long life in the land the Lord your God has given you.
Miriam noted the shift in their God's commandments, for that is what these were. The Lord was providing the newly liberated fledgling nation with the laws that would guide and shape their society. He had begun with their relationship with him, how subjects relate to their ruler. But now it seemed he would outline how they were to live together in their society.
Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's house, nor his wife, his male or female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Miriam beamed to herself. She was right. These statutes would become the bedrock of their administrative and judiciary systems, caring for the elderly, outlining capital offenses, and preserving the purity of the family unit. At the end of their God's words, another great flash of lightning and roar of thunder cracked through the sky. It reverberated into the rock below their feet, cutting short Miriam's self-satisfaction at discerning the purpose of the commandments. The sound was so great it blocked out all thought besides the noise and light. She struggled to keep her footing as the ground trembled. The mighty display continued without their God's voice, and Miriam glimpsed at the people around her. They were crouched in fear, covering their ears and eyes with their hands. It was as if they were inside of the very storm itself. The ground was still shaking and rolling beneath their feet, and as one stepped back, the columns of over 2 million souls stepped back. Some ran, some crawled, but all shrank away from the mountain's base. Then the shofar resumed its triumphant rhythmic blasts, the lightning, thunder, horn, and earth quaking beneath its strange immersive orchestra. Miriam was lost in its alien melody, and its presence was all-consuming. It was terrible, wonderful, and otherworldly. And as suddenly as it had begun, the storm and the music cut out. Absolute silence hung in the air like the dense clouds above. Miriam tentatively lifted her hands away from her ears and looked around. The Israelites were in various stages of their attempts to flee. She saw that more than a few tears, sweat, and urine had swept through the terrified throng. Miriam's own hands were shaking uncontrollably. She breathed deeply in and out, trying to calm her frantic nerves. She saw that her brothers had not fared much better. The 3 of them had remained in their places at the boundary lines, though the crowd had shrunk back significantly. Aaron looked as shaken as she felt, but was quickly smoothing his face and his clothes. Moses was still holding his staff and staring up at the mountain in the direction, silently communicating with an unheard voice. Miriam knew the look. Sure enough, Moses turned to face them, and strode confidently toward the stunned masses. Miriam and Aaron flanked him like silent shadows. The people were murmuring frantically amongst themselves as they approached. They quieted as the trio approached.
Speak, my brothers and sisters. You've just heard the word of our God.
Moses' words were met with silence for a long moment. The air was charged with frantic thoughts. The feeling in the air was so palpable you could almost taste it, but no words were being formed aloud. Fear, pure and unadulterated. After what felt like a lifetime, the closest and boldest looking man finally stepped forward to address their leader.
We all agree. You speak to us and we will listen. But don't let the Lord speak to us, or we will die.
Moses looked surprised at his response. He then took in the trembling, united faces throughout the crowd. He sighed, but addressed them half-heartedly, unable to keep the disappointment from his face.
Do not be afraid. Our God has come to test you, so that the fear of him will be in you, and you will not sin. For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Predictably, the crowd remained unmoved. They did not approach Moses or even glance toward the mountain behind him. Miriam watched her brother wrestle silently for a long moment as he stared out at the chosen people of their God. Miriam would not admit it readily, but she was relieved by the people's desire to keep Moses as their God's mouthpiece. She still honored her God and held her faith in her heart like a steady flame, but something about the presence of their God had shaken her to the core in a way she was not ready to comprehend. And, more importantly, she did not fear a man. She could understand the commands and leadership of a man. The supernatural and unpredictable nature of their God unsettled her so deeply. Moses concluded whatever war was waging in his mind and turned away from the people, seemingly accepting their request as he departed in the direction of the mountain. He steadily walked into the growing darkness as he once again climbed the darkened mountain to meet with their God. Almost a full day passed since Moses approached the mountain to receive further instruction from their God, and several more passed since he relayed those instructions, recorded the words, and set up an altar with 12 pillars, one for each tribe. Moses was nothing if not a productive man. A new silence settled over the people, and Moses turned, motioning for the elders to follow him. They climbed the slope, away from the crowd, and Aaron felt himself pulled into a strange, heavy calm as he walked beside his brother, knowing full well what was to come. They reached the place Moses had marked for the covenant, a rough altar he had built from unworked stones, simple yet solemn. With grim ceremony, he took up a basin of blood from the sacrificial bulls and began to sprinkle it upon the altar. He spoke the words of the covenant aloud, sealing the laws they had just heard, and then, with slow deliberation, he turned to the elders and cast the blood upon them as well. Aaron felt the warm droplets spatter his face, the metallic scent filling his nostrils. Blood trickled down his cheek, streaking his robes and his skin. He glanced at his sons, Nadab and Abihu, who stood in quiet reverence, their faces pale but resolute. Nadab shifted slightly, his face flickering with uncertainty, but he quickly steadied himself, meeting his father's gaze. Moses lifted his hands, his voice carrying over the assembly.
This blood seals the covenant the Lord has made with you.
The elders murmured their assent, each face solemn, each man bound by the blood now streaking his skin. Nadab glanced at his father, a question lingering in his eyes, but he did not speak it aloud. After the sacrifice, Moses led them further up the mountain, motioning for the elders to follow him. Aaron felt Nadab's hand upon his arm, steadying himself. He could see the flicker of fear in his son's eyes, the hint of something close to dread.
I think we ought to ascend further. Stand up straight, son. This is an important moment.
They climbed higher, leaving the murmurs of the people behind. As they reached a high plateau, a strange, otherworldly light broke through the clouds above, casting an eerie sapphire glow upon the ground. Aaron squinted, and for a moment he thought he saw something vast and terrible far above them. A throne, it seemed, set upon a pavement of sapphire, clear as the sky, blazing with an unearthly light. Aaron fell to his knees, unable to bear the sight of it, the awe and terror mingling in his heart, and beside him the elders did the same, their faces pale and reverent. They stayed in that posture until Moses finally broke the stillness, calling them to the covenant meal. Aaron tore a piece of bread, eating silently, his hands still trembling. But just as he lifted the cup to his lips, a voice rang out again, a voice that shattered all thoughts and bound them as surely as the blood upon their skin.
Moses, come to me upon the mountain. I shall give you the tablets of stone, which are written my law and commandments.
Moses rose, his face set. He looked out over the gathered elders, and his gaze lingered upon Hoshea, his young aide, who stood trembling at the rear.
Come, Hoshea. You shall go further with me.
Hoshea's eyes widened, his face pale, but he nodded. Aaron watched as the young man gathered himself, his face a mixture of fear and awe, and took his place beside Moses. Moses looked back at his brother and the other elders. Aaron's heart began to race with questions. Would Moses be safe? When would he return? What would become of him when he entered the fray? Moses, sensing his brother's anxiety, turned to him and nodded.
See you soon, brother.
Aaron opened his mouth to speak, but for once he was at a loss for words. He simply nodded and watched the two figures begin to climb, vanishing slowly into the swirling clouds, drawn up into the smoke and fire that burned on Sinai's heights. As Aaron watched them go, the silence fell once more, heavy and final, and he felt in his heart the weight of the covenant, the blood and fire that would bind them not just as a people, but as a promise sealed in fear, law, and sacrifice.
The 10 Commandments, inscribed by God's very finger. These aren't just ancient decrees, they're living words that continue to shape our lives. They remind us that we are people set apart. We are a people set apart, bound by a divine calling. And we have to ask, how can we, in our modern lives, embody the spirit of the law given at Sinai? This episode wasn't just a recounting of history, it was an invitation to live out the principles that were handed down to us, to let them shape our actions and our hearts. With the Bible story echoing in our hearts, let us strive to be a light into the nations, faithful to the covenant that began at Sinai. Picture a wedding where vows are spoken. These commandments are those vows, the sacred terms of our relationship with God given to his chosen people. The first 3 commandments shape our bond with God. No other gods before me. This commandment is one of exclusive allegiance to the God who led us out of Egypt and claimed us as his own. No idols. Well, we've witnessed the chosen people see God appear in the cloud of fire, not as an image. Creating idols is a betrayal, reducing our infinite creator to a finite form. And, quote, do not misuse the name of the Lord, end quote. This is about carrying his name with reverence. Our actions and words must reflect his holiness. And these first 3 commandments lead us to the 4th. In the Jewish candace of the week, one day stands apart, Shabbat, the Sabbath. Have you ever wondered why this day is so pivotal to the Jewish faith? It's not just a day of rest. No, it's so much more than that. The Sabbath is the heartbeat of the Jewish people's existence. It's the anchor that has kept us grounded through the very uncertain waves of history. For millennia, Shabbat has been our sanctuary, the sacred time that has preserved Judaism, vibrant and unyielding. And for these thousands of years, it has been the essence of our very survival. By following this commandment, the Jewish people passed on our faith and God's laws to the very next generation through times of persecution. By following this commandment, the Jewish people have passed on their faith and God's law to the next generation, even through times of persecution and hardships. Through the Sabbath, the chosen people have survived. And it says, quote, 6 days you shall labor, end quote. These words from Exodus 29 hold a profound mystery. In Hebrew, the word for you shall labor is said, ta'avod, but it also means you shall serve. What if I told you that our sages interpret this, ta'avod, for 6 days you should ta'avod, to mean that for 6 days our work is our service to God. For 6 days, every mundane task that we do, every effort, is actually an act of worship. And on the 7th day, our service transforms. By resting on the Sabbath, we serve God in a deeper, more profound way. Our worth isn't tied to our productivity when it comes to the Sabbath. No, our value lies in our identity as the chosen people. Isn't that a radical thought in today's busy world? That for 6 days we serve God by working, but on the 7th day we serve God simply by being. The rabbi and physician Maimonides had a beautiful teaching about the Sabbath. This is what he said. If a person sleeps in order to allow his mind to rest and to give rest to his body so that he should not become sick and unable to serve God because of illness, in this case, his very sleep is service to God. You see, sometimes we serve God by working hard at contributing to his purpose of bettering this world. And sometimes the greatest thing that we can do for the glory of God is to do nothing at all. Now let's talk about the final commandment, coveting. The 10th commandment touches a nerve, doesn't it? The Jewish sages offer this stark wisdom on the matter. Whoever desires something that is not his will not get what he wants, and actually he'll lose what he already has. Think about that. How often do we chase what others possess only to lose sight of our own blessings? What have you lost in the pursuit of what isn't yours? We risk so much when we covet, yet we have everything to gain by cherishing what God has already given us. Contentment is truly a gift from God, isn't it? It's really something to think that God gave these commandments to the chosen people at Sinai, isn't it? And it's truly a responsibility for all of us today as the chosen people to keep this covenant made in the Bible. I want to take a look at a couple of these laws beyond the 10 Commandments that this episode brought to mind. In Exodus 22:21, God commands us, quote, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were once foreigners in Egypt," end quote. We have to look at this verse and say, what does this mean for us today? Our history of oppression in Egypt instills in us a deep, unyielding empathy. It binds us to a covenantal responsibility to protect the vulnerable in our society, something that the fellowship is able to do because of compassionate Christian friends like you. We're able to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the poor, help the elderly, because Christians have taken this verse seriously. Jewish tradition extends this command to care for everyone who's marginalized. Who are the foreigners among us today? In Exodus 22:22, it says, "Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless." Here, the Hebrew word for take advantage is te'anu, and this also translates as make suffer. This command is not just a call for us not to exploit others, but we see from the Hebrew word that it uses that it's a command to us from God to actively prevent suffering. At the fellowship, we are dedicated to ensuring that the suffering, the elderly, the widows, the Holocaust survivors, the orphans, the needy children, that they do not endure pain and neglect, that they have dignity and joy because they know that they're not alone. We are called to this work by God. I'd like to close today with something the Bible says after God had given the Ten Commandments. The Bible tells us, quote, "The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was." It makes me think we all go through dark times, don't we? Financial difficulties, painful relationships with a spouse or with a family member. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one, or maybe you're experiencing illness or someone that you cherish is ill. The question is, how do we react to this thick darkness? Do we keep our distance from God, or do we get closer to Him? Going through dark times can make us feel far from God. But the Bible teaches us an amazing lesson in these verses, that God is in the darkness. A dark time isn't the time to turn away from God. It's actually the exact moment to draw closer to Him.
You can listen to The Chosen People with Yael Eckstein ad-free by downloading and subscribing to the pray.com app today. This pray.com production is only made possible by our dedicated team of creative talents. Steve Katina, Max Bard, Zach Schellebarger, and Ben Gammon are the executive producers of The Chosen People with Yael Eckstein, edited by Alberto Avila, narrated by Paul Coltofianu. Characters are voiced by Jonathan Cotton, Aaron Salvato, Sarah Seltz, Mike Reagan, Stephen Ringwald, Sylvia Zaradoc, and the opening prayer is voiced by John Moore. Music by Andrew Morgan Smith, written by Bree Roseley and Aaron Salvato. Special thanks to Bishop Paul Lanier, Robin Van Etten, Caleb Burrows, Jocelyn Fuller, and the team at International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. You can hear more Pray.com productions on the Pray.com app, available on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. If you enjoyed The Chosen People with Yael Eckstein, please rate and leave a review.